Hello there, welcome to the Ukrainian Media Podcast. I'm Olena Solodovnikova, and it's a great pleasure for me to be joined by Sylvia Colombo, a journalist specializing in South America. Hello, Sylvia.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, recently, the Russian President Vladimir Putin refused to participate in the G20 summit to be held in Brazil. And also became known that Brazilian president cancelled his trip to Russia to the BRICS summit. What do these diplomatic gestures mean? Give us a heads up about relation between Russia and Brazil now.
Yeah, as far as I knew, and as far as I could in these few weeks between Ukraine, Brasilia, and now where I am, I've been trying to figure it out. How are really the connections between Brazil and Ukraine and Brazil and Russia? And what we can see and what we can say now is that Brazil is pretty much waiting for having finally a discussion, a panel, a secret meeting. The format could be implemented after, but he wanted to meet Mr. President Zelensky before he has an opportunity to talk face to face to Mr. Putin, and that's right. That's why President Lula didn't go to Russia for the BRICS summit in Kazan, although he really had this incident in his house and was not able to travel. But it was only a detail on all of this. Yeah, what everybody in Brazil, and as I heard from high officials in Ukraine as well, they are also waiting for an okay from Vladimir Zelensky side to say, okay, let's sit and talk, just the two of us, and then we'll say what we think about the other ones. This is what I think from the Brazilian perspective, from the Brazilian point of view, what is missing to try to go on these difficult, very difficult negotiations.
Yep, and the G20 summit will be held in Rio de Janeiro, and Brazil has ratified the Rome Statute more than 20 years ago, and this country is obliged to arrest Putin. Will Brazil make arrest, or would it close its eyes like Mongolia some months ago, a couple of months ago?
Yeah, the thing about arresting someone outside their country, there must be an international order, which it is for Putin. And if you're not being accepted by a country who will disrespect this order, it will be very complicated. Yeah, and in a interview at the beginning of the week with President Putin, between President Putin and some international journalists, one of them was Brazilian. They asked, "Are you going to Rio? Because in Rio, in November, we are holding the G20, which means this reunion between the 20 most wealthiest countries in the world, and Putin is one of them. But Putin is also nowadays someone who is persecuted for crimes of war. So leaving leaving Russia is not easy for him if he doesn't want to get caught. And so at this interview, he said, "I'm not going to Brazil because I don't want to be like the
like
center
a problem." Yeah.
Attention in the party of my friend Lula, in which you see there is a double message there. First, I won't go because I am they are looking for me. They will put me in jail. But the other hand, he said, I don't want to cause problems to my friend Lula, which then remarks that Brazilian president would be on his side only, which is not completely the truth. It's not completely what Brazilian society means, that we are all in the side of Putin.
But what is about their relation between Lula and Putin, not between the Brazilian society? Are they really friends, or that is something not true? It's not reality.
I don't think they are really friends. I think that that Lula is pretty much since the beginning of his career, he has been trying to be the leader of a multilateral front. You know, he doesn't like the idea that we have the United States and the other and the other side you have everybody else. He likes the idea of a world where you have multiple centers and multiple centers of power, commerce. And this is something that he has always been talking about. But also, I don't think that this could automatically support the idea of a great Russia or imperial Russia or a Russia that is dominating the whole Latin America. I don't think Lula wants that at all. When he talks about multilaterality, he's talking about making commerce in our own currency, meeting people like not as if they are surrogate or to another empire, but citizens of their own countries. I think this is what Lula has in mind, and maybe Putin doesn't think exactly the same way. But I mean, they know each other a lot. Yeah, I don't think we can forget what happened before the war and the years previous the war. Putin and Lula has a long story of being talking about the futures of mankind, and I don't know if Lula is completely synchronized or completely in support of everything that Putin is doing now.
But when Russia wanted to make connection with some countries, they support them with money, like in Venezuela in crisis. You know, they give money to Venezuela. Are there some business connection with Brazil and Russia?
Russia is definitely very interested on these countries that are not aligned to the USA, mostly Venezuela, Nicaragua, even Cuba, and other countries that has a lot of oil. For example, I think Venezuela is the most important example. This is a battle in which they kind of forget their ideologies. Even the United States and Russia, you know, they want the Venezuela's oil. But the fact is that Russia is helping Venezuela pretty much more than the United States is, just like it was in Cuba. So people in Cuba, then, and people in Venezuela now would prefer to support Russia. I don't think this is happening in Brazil at all. I think Brazil would like very much to be the place in South America where the Venezuelans can trust without having to seek support abroad, to seek support in the US, to seek support in the UA, or to seek support in Russia. I mean, we have a huge frontier between Peru and Venezuela. We should be cooperating more. And maybe all this oil that goes to Russia directly, because there are a lot of sanctions and a lot of blockades that does not permit the Venezuelan oil to go abroad, could stay in the region and help the region. I don't think the Maduro would be so much against it, but this is one of the fights that Lula must have without losing power internally, because every time that Lula tries to talk to Maduro in these senses, the opposition in Brazil would be very critical.
I wanted to back to the idea to bipolar world, because that is very a lot of discussion in Ukraine now about that, and now that we have only several poles by influence and the new poles will be emerged, does Brazil have ambitions to become one of the world's leaders? I mean, not only Lula's dreams, but at all. And why and what place Brazil can stay on this multi-polus world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for some presidents, it's been more important than others. I think Brazil with Lula would like very much to be the leader of Latin America. And it's not that difficult to imagine why. And the answer is that Brazil is the hugest and most prosperous Latin American economies. So he really wanted to had like the priority and to have the leadership to guide the others. But it doesn't mean that Brazil can do it. Even though very small countries of Latin America, like Uruguay, for example, sometimes surprises Brazil, saying, "Oh, this package of treatments that you want to reach with the European Union, we're not interested. We want to sign treatments with China, and it's a small country. Uruguay is 3 million people. It's like a very, very small country. So I cannot say that Lula has the whole power to lead Latin America one way or the other, because the others also have their own limitations and their own dreams and their own perspectives. But yeah, I would say that under Lula, Brazil is always seeking for national leadership. I wouldn't say it's the same in when Bolsonaro was the president or even when Temer was the president, but for Lula, this is quite important.
Yeah, and so about the peace plan, which provides for the halt of hostiles in Ukraine and recognize the negotiation process as the only possible way out of the conflict. Previously, Brazil was neutral to the conflict, and why did they need to announce a peace plan now with China?
I think the situation in Ukraine is getting even more serious for Lula not to have a side, not to have a position that is stronger. I understand that he doesn't want to be confrontational with Russia because somehow because of our political interests, but also because I think the Brazilian government doesn't know Ukraine very well. I mean, they know Ukraine since you guys were independent, and we followed all the fights for liberating your territories. But nowadays, it's still something that it's unknown. If you talk to the common people, to the majority of society in Brazil, they'll say, "Oh, Ukraine, oh yeah, part of Russia." They would not know what it is, what
Even
we are
now.
about. And I think our president, although it is our president, he's also thinks about that as well. That's why it's so important for us that Lula goes to Ukraine and had the opportunity to see what me and other journalists and writers could be able to see, to make a whole picture in his head. Yeah. And as long as Putin can continue to be his ally, even though he's a criminal of war, and even though he has a lot of bad stuff in his placards, he could still be a friend of Russia without facing away or ignoring what's happening in Ukraine. And it's pretty which is pretty serious. And when we see in a couple of years or less, the Ukraine reclaims about their disappears, about the human rights issues, I think it's very difficult for Brazil to say, I don't agree with that. They're all Russians. Brazil will never take this position. What I think it's needed for Brazil is a bit more time and information to know that Ukraine is something completely different than Russia. I know it sounds foolish maybe for me to tell you that, but we are far, far, far away from you. So these questions that might seem so evident for you, it's not that much for the Brazilian society.
But if Brazilian society don't know a lot about Ukraine, while Lula wanted to join to peace plan, was he pushed by Putin to this peace plan, or he was pushed by China leader?
Yeah. It's something that he would held accountable for that, because Brazilian society already realized there are human crimes against humanity being held in Ukraine, and a lot of people has arrived here as a product of Ukraine fleeing from where they came from. And I think the Brazilian society has more idea of what you guys are going through than maybe the government. I think it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time until they understand that you guys doesn't want to live by Russian rules. And what is most important, if Lula wants to keep his key commercial links to Russia, it doesn't mean he does need to quit on Ukraine. On the other hand, he could be embracing Ukraine for having this difficult human crimes condemnations go through. One thing doesn't eliminate the other. Yeah. What I do think is that he's an old politician, and he'll say, well, Russia, I know very well what it is. Perhaps we should support them. But these guys, I don't know, they just appeared. Who are them? And I think the Brazilian government is still in this process, in different ways, different layers of knowing it. Some of it by knowing by the press, some of them by knowing from the diplomats. But I think that with time, they are understanding that Ukraine is something pretty much more different than Russia.
Could you elaborate what is commercial links between Brazil and Russia, the main of them?
Sorry?
Could you elaborate about commercial links? You talk about that. What is the main of them?
Yeah. The main things that they exchange is oil, grains, some agro-industrial material products, and I think more of them is the geopolitical position. Brazil is trying, since President Lula arrived, to be a multilateralistic government. What does he mean by that? He doesn't want a world that is governed by the dollar or the euro. He thinks that we have to have South resolutions for the South, being South America, South Asian, South Africa. This is a kind of something that he holds dear. And by that means, I think that Ukraine would be very important to convince him that if you have this South-South agreement, you must accept Ukraine just like it is right now, or maybe right now and with less Russians in it. Yeah. So I think they started to learn a lot about Ukraine. Just I wouldn't blame President Lula, because a lot of us doesn't know all of these things, you know. And this war make us think about what is Ukraine, who are these people, what they're speaking of and about, and what's so different they are from the from the old Soviet Union. And I think Lula is going in the same way. You can imagine he is an 80 something socialist leader who was brought to the public life in the 80s, where Soviet Union was something completely it was a blockade, you know. You see that as something without crisps and without divisions. And then suddenly you start to realize that it has a lot of nations, a lot of languages, a lot of people there that are not Russian. And I think the president is going through the same process as the whole Brazilian society, I would say.
Yes, and I think you and the Brazilian journalists should inform Lula that Ukraine is the main agricultural hub of Europe, and previously was the main agricultural hub of the Soviet Union. So
Yeah.
if he interested in some cooperation with us in this sphere, we are open for Brazil.
Yeah.
We have a lot of wheat, and we know that the war between Ukraine and Russia is not only about the genocide. Yes, of course, it's about the genocide of our people, but it's about the business routes, about the wheat, about the ports when the wheat go abroad. And so that is a main key things that Lula can understand. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the military conflict of us, because you covered military conflicts many times, including the Balkans. And from your point of view, what is the uniqueness, what is the novelty about the Russian-Ukrainian war?
Comparing to the Balkans War?
Compare with the different war, which especially Balkans. What is our uniqueness?
Well, what strikes me most about Ukrainian war is that it is a war that it seems doesn't have a clear, an open-ended. Yeah, I mean, there's no deadline for this war. Yeah, it's not that we are waiting for that specific time of the year, of the month in which we are sit and negotiate our terms. That scares me a lot, because I see that Russian. What strikes me most is that Russia has a lot more of military power. I know I can be some people in the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian army could be against me, saying, no, we have still a lot to confront the Russian shoulders. But do you? I don't know. I have some doubts on that. And when you guys, and when I was there, and you guys would say, "Oh, see you after the victory," always this phrase kept a very heavy thing for me in the stomach. I mean, they're not winning. I mean, for me, I was thinking they're not winning this. The only way of winning would be a settlement, an arrangement, a negotiation, because Russia is much powerful. I'm telling you, as a third world country that will never resist an American invasion. And I think Ukraine is the same. You won't leave this war like winning to the other side. Maybe you find a solution by dialogue, a good solution by dialogue, or a bad solution by dialogue. Or maybe you get Crimea and everything you want. Maybe you get only Crimea, or maybe only some of the occupied states. But at some point, you have to leave. I don't know. I've been covering for long years. I've been covering the conflict in Colombia, and in Colombia you had a lot of. It's different. It's completely different. But I mean, in Colombia for a long time you had some spaces in the territory that was commanded by alien forces, by the criminals, the FARC, the guerrilla, the cartels, and what the government then decided was not to take everyone out and put everyone in prison and to judge everyone. It was impossible. It was a way to do, and the only way they found was, let's make an arrangement. We make this arrangement, and then everyone who says that killed, I don't know how many people from the country, and all of you who killed a lot of people from the government, okay, amnesty for all of you. You don't go to the castle, you don't go to jail, you don't pay for that, but we are looking at you, don't do it again. And then we have peace. And then we decide what to do with this land, that no Colombian was allowed to put a feet in most of 60% of Colombian territory, and then they would. And this is priceless, And I worked in this recovery of the identity, which was beautiful, because we could enter the lands that were part of what was used by the cartels, by the criminals, and we can see all the river, the no sé qué. This could be a touristic park. This could be a biological station, and everything is working like that right now. But this is because we don't ask these guys, you all go to jail. If we said that, they will never leave this land for us. So I think one point, somehow Ukrainians and Russians will have to make deals and make concessions and somehow give amnesties that are difficult to swallow in many ways, but maybe they are necessary.
But so you advise to not to provide that idea to keep the borders from our independence, to stay on the borders on that moment, and try to continue the new Ukrainian life without war on the borders and lost some territories of our country. Do you think that is a better idea than to fight against Russia? I completely agree with you. The Russian is not have a bad soldiers that had a bad weapon. That is a myth. Sometimes our Ukrainian propaganda talk about, oh, Russian, that is very stupid, like a army and others. But yes, you are right. They are continue to develop their army, their soldiers, their units, and they are not so foolish people. So we need to stay on the borders in that moment and make agreements with them. But the difference between Colombia and that in Colombia there was a civil war, and in Ukraine that is not a civil war. That is not about that. That is the main difference between these situations.
Yeah, it's a main difference, and I think it's difficult. It is for each population of each region to decide. It depends. Somehow you are completely under the control of the Russian militia or the Ukrainian army, and you have to follow them. And then then I think you have to follow them. It's not there is no option, you know. But I think I would be, if I were Ukrainian at this times, and depending in which region, I would fight for some kind of humanity dialogue. Okay, you want this peace. Okay, you don't have the authority to give this peace for him. You have to ask Zelensky. But as though as you have this peace, I want to know. I want to map all languages and works of art and children that are writing about this. I want this for me because it's my research. It's for my Ukrainian country, my Ukrainian legacy. And I think this is something that should be included in negotiation, not only the territories. That's what I'm talking about. Not only the territories matter, and also what happened to territories. Yeah. And you Ukrainians should be allowed to know in your language what happened in your territories, even though tomorrow they will be Russian territories because the peace agreements said so. And maybe the peace agreements will said so. But you should be allowed to know what happened there.
Yes,
I
I
don't
completely agree. And back to Colombia, civil war, which lasted from 1964 to 2016, that some force which was very important, very pivotal in this war was Marxist FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Could you please explain why leftist movement still remain popular in Latin America? And who is supported these movements, left movements?
I mean, it's different from one country to the other. I would say it's not, the left-wing parties are not still very common in Colombia because of the violence that was perpetrated by the guerrilla. The guerrilla, you know, in the first moment, they had this Marxist idea that they were the ones that with a knife in their hands and a head and an idea in their head, they would take the oligarch command and strip it out, and it will be the government of the workers. You know that it is not that simple, yeah. But the guerrillas who were born in Colombia in the 60s, they believed that. With time, they changed. First, because they were pretty much persecuted and killed. In some ways fair, some ways unfair. But they decreased a lot, and then they started to make amends and make some alliance with real criminal groups that were only aiming to narco traffic, to drug traffic in the borders, that was still growing after the marijuana wave, then the cocaine wave, then the fentanyl wave, now the design drugs wave. There's always another wave, and everybody who worked at some point for an idea in the guerrillas now are working for these criminals who lost completely the idea of a better Colombia with less oligarchy, with less bourgeois managing us. So that's why Colombia is so complicated, and I don't think it's comparable right now with Russia, but I think things we can compare between Colombia and Russia. That's Colombia. I've been studying a lot, and I can tell you with a bit more of common sense. They are, after they agreed the peace process, they started to make these trials. because this is something that you guys should think as well. At one day, this war will be over. So, are you going to go after each one of the colonels who bombed Kiev, who bombed Kharkiv, who bombed Zaporizhia, who bombed whatever, and try to assume that they killed these people, these people? Sometimes it's pretty difficult. And what I think that Colombians did is pretty amazing, because they made this huge trials. In one side, it was the judges, the families of the ones that died, and then the families of the ones that perpetrated the killings. And they had the reasons as well. They would say, we're being exploited, we're being extortionated. And our boy went to the civil paramilitary when he was 13. So both sides were like, oh, terrible. It was impossible to take a side, you know? But it was like a common psychodrama, you know, that this society should be confronted with. Much more than, oh, we have a sentence, we have a condemnation. It doesn't mean anymore. It's gone. You know, it's terrible, but it's gone. And this is something that I noticed in Colombia that impacts me a lot, because in Brazil we never had. But I am fully capable to understand that maybe this is completely different from Ukraine, because it's a larger story, it's a larger conflict with a lot of particularities that we don't have here in South America. So I don't know. And I would like to know about you. What kind of justice would you see in the post-conflict, if there is one?
I asked Slavenka Drakulic about that, about the how it was in Balkans, and she told me the same, that we want to make these courts unofficially or officially, but the main problems with Russian, absolutely, from the start of the war in 2014, during the 10 years, a lot of people from Russian side who make crimes, they vanished. They vanished. We can't get arms to them. Only small people, like ordinary soldiers, we can get them to capture them and to make these trials. But many very famous commanders that they vanished to the Russian territory, and then absolutely no information about them. So that is a very very important process. You are absolutely right, for families to be satisfied about that situation with crimes, war crimes, but that is will be many years continue, and probably 20 years, 30 years or more, until the death of the both sides, like during the Second World War between the fascists and people who were struggle from them. And yes, to the end, I'd like to discuss the issue of information security. There was a time when Brazil banned the Twitter X, and in Ukraine, it was presented as a censorship, but it was not quite so. Could you clarify what was happened in Brazil with Twitter?
Yeah, you know, for the population and societies abroad, what was more, I mean, what people got more is that Brazil was censorshiping Twitter in Brazil. No, yeah, Brazil was censorship Twitter because of Elon Musk. It's not that easy to put it on these senses. Right now, for example, Twitter is completely okay in Brazil. It's functioning okay. But we had some problems with Twitter in the past, in which Twitter was responsible of a lot of hate speech against the government, against the opposition, and mainly when transition was made between Bolsonaro and Lula, Twitter was pretty much used by a small group in the government called the Hate Cabinet, which was leading by the son of President Jair Bolsonaro, to produce and disseminate in the network stories that were not true about politicians, journalists, people from that has some high voice in society. For example, I have a good friend of mine who works with disinformation, Patricia. She's could be a nice person for you to talk to if you continue with this. She had a pretty long and important investigation on Bolsonaro and disinformation. And when she published that, Bolsonaro supporters started to publish her son's address, school, and where she lived, where her older mother used to do shopping. I mean, this is out of reach.
Yes, this private information and
of course. So what some media groups, mine as well, started to realize that there was no one in Twitter where we can complain about it. So Alexandre de Moraes, which is just justice from the Supreme Court, said, no, you don't have where to reclaim, because this company doesn't have a legal representative in Brazil, as many others don't in many countries. And he started to ask Twitter to have a legal representative in Brazil. And then Elon Musk and Twitter started to trash Brazil, saying, "Oh, Brazil is censoring us." It's not true. By the Brazilian law, you have to, if you want to put a commerce of books in Brazil, you have to say, I am a Ukrainian editor and library, and we want to publish Ukrainian books in Brazil, and it'll be fine. But these guys just put Twitter down, and it was causing damage to boys, girls, children. And then these judges decided, no, until they don't accomplish all these requisites, we won't let them play here. And it lasted like for 12 days. Then Twitter applied. There is someone in Twitter Brazilian offices. They received a lot of fees they're going to pay, but this is the way it is. If you're talking about business, yeah. And now the other social media like Facebook, all meta social media, WhatsApp, they all have someone that is responsible for Brazil, which I think is more than reasonable. Even in Brazil and US and Colombia and Uruguay and Ukraine. So it looked like he's doing just like Maduro. He said, don't use Twitter. It's not like this. It's just was not complying Brazilian law. And he was exposing people who are minor, you know?
Yes, we have the same problem with Telegram in Ukraine now, that many, that is under control. We can't control Twitter and Telegram, and that's why many information and disinformation link through this Telegram, and we can't to control it. And the next problem with this Telegram, that is very popular in the source of information from Ukrainians. 70% or 80% of Ukrainians got information from that. And what about Brazilian? How Twitter and other social media influence to the people, and can your media, official media, compare with to make competition with this social media now?
Yeah, we do have a robust media, like independent media, newspapers, news outlets, sites that are connected with newspapers or TV channels, or TV channels is itself, like global. They have a national approach, which is very good, because they are not that biased. Some of them has some bias one side or the other, but they would always respect the other side, you know. And this traditional media will always have this idea of only publish things that are comprovated, that you can cross the information with other sources, and publish what is really going on. Yeah, Brazilian, I can say, is differently than Argentina, where I'm spending time right now. In Brazil, I think we have a robust media. In Argentina, I wouldn't say so, but in Brazil, we have a robust media. But even in a robust media, this kind of, how you say, this noisy, you know, impacts negatively, you know. I see when I met parents or relatives in Brazil and say, oh, you see, Elon Musk decided to put a censorship on what we do, what you do. So, what do I do? No. Maybe what do I do that is published in Twitter, but it's published in the newspaper. But what I think is happening with this right-wing wave that is getting us is to try to make a confusion, between wise, independent, nice media outlets and the social networks. And they would prefer, I see here in Argentina, I say that Milei would prefer a world without newspapers and only the media, or only social media. Brazil, I wouldn't say that for Lula or for the center, but I would say that the right wing would prefer only the social media, no newspapers, no outlets. So it's a very challenging time we're living in now.